The castle stood upon the precipice like a crown of stone thrust into the throat of the sky. Parapets of ancient granite pierced the rolling fog that perpetually shrouded the mountaintop, their edges worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Moonlight washed over the fortress in pale waves, revealing stained glass windows that glittered like dark jewels against the weathered walls. This was Castel Dracon, the ancestral seat of Lord Alaric Valerian Dracon, a name whispered in fear across the surrounding valleys for over 6 centuries. Inside, silence reigned, the kind of silence that had weight and substance, the kind that settled into the stones themselves. Tapestries depicting ancient conquests hung motionless in the still air, their colors muted by time and dust. Candelabras cast pools of golden light that did little to dispel the darkness gathered in the corners, shadows that seemed to breathe and watch with patient malevolence. Lord Dracon moved through the eastern corridor, his footfalls making no sound on the marble floor. He had long ago mastered the art of silence, of becoming one with the darkness he commanded. His tall figure was wrapped in a cloak of midnight silk that billowed slightly despite the absence of wind, as if responding to some invisible current that flowed around his form. 6 centuries of unlife had refined his features to painful perfection: high cheekbones, a noble brow, lips like a cruel sculpture. His eyes, deep-set and piercing, held the color of garnets, not the bright scarlet of newly turned vampires, but the dark, ancient red of blood that had long dried upon stone. He paused before a portrait hung in a place of honor, a woman with raven hair and eyes that seemed to follow his movement. Caterina, his wife in life, dead now for 604 years. Her beauty remained captured in oils and pigment, but even this approximation caused a familiar hollowness to spread within his chest. He had loved her once, with the desperate passion of youth, and when plague had taken her, he had made his unholy bargain with darkness to transcend death itself. For what? To wander these halls alone for centuries, to watch empires rise and fall with the detachment of a god, to feel hunger as his only true companion. "My lord!" The voice, soft and hesitant, broke through his reverie. Lord Dracon did not turn immediately, collecting himself, arranging his features into their customary mask of aristocratic indifference. Only then did he face the intruder upon his solitude. Thomas Blackwood stood at a respectful distance, head slightly bowed. The young man had been in his service for nearly a year now, yet Lord Dracon still found himself surprised by the human's lack of fear. Most mortals who entered his service either fled within a fortnight or developed the nervous, flinching demeanor of prey animals. But Thomas carried himself with a quiet dignity that was both refreshing and perplexing. "What is it, Thomas?" Lord Dracon's voice resonated with the musical cadence of his ancient homeland, an accent no living linguist could place. "The hour grows late, my lord," Thomas said, raising his hazel eyes briefly. "I've prepared your chamber for the day's rest, and there are matters requiring your attention before dawn." Lord Dracon nodded, casting one final glance at Caterina's portrait before following his servant through the winding passages of the castle. Thomas moved with practiced efficiency, lighting their way with a silver lantern that cast his shadow long against the walls. He was not particularly tall, but possessed a wiry strength evident in his movements. Chestnut hair fell in waves to his collar, framing a face that seemed too gentle for the shadows of Castel Dracon. Yet there was something compelling about the young man's presence, a serenity that seemed to quiet the restlessness that had plagued Lord Dracon for centuries. They entered the Lord's private study, a vast circular room housed within one of the castle's primary towers. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, a collection spanning millennia and dozens of languages, many now extinct. A fire burned in the massive hearth, its flames the only concession to mortal comfort in the otherwise austere chamber. The dancing light caught the copper threads in Thomas's hair, turning them to liquid fire as he moved about the room. arranging documents on the massive oak desk. Lady Bathory's envoy arrived during the twilight hours, Thomas explained, indicating a sealed letter bearing a wax insignia of a raven devouring its own heart. She requests your presence at the winter solstice gathering. Lord Draken's lip curled slightly. Elizabeth grows presumptuous in her relative youth. She forgets that I outrank her by nearly 3 centuries. Perhaps it is not presumption, but respect that motivates her invitation, Thomas suggested, his voice neutral. The gathering will include representatives from all 13 bloodlines. Your absence would be remarked upon. The vampire's eyes narrowed slightly. Most servants would never dare offer such commentary. But in the year since Thomas had arrived, Lord Draken had grown accustomed to the human's occasional counsel, finding it refreshingly free of the sycophancy and hidden agendas that characterized interactions with his own kind. Your point is taken, Lord Draken conceded, settling into the high-backed chair behind the desk. He broke the seal on Lady Bathory's letter, scanning its contents with practiced indifference. She mentions you specifically. Thomas paused in the act of stoking the fire. Me, my lord. Indeed, she writes that she is most curious about the human who has survived in your service longer than any in recent memory. It seems your reputation precedes you, Thomas. A faint flush colored the servant's cheeks, visible even in the dim light. I have done nothing to warrant such attention. Survival among our kind is achievement enough, Lord Draken replied, setting the letter aside. Lady Bathory collects beautiful things, and beautiful people. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Among vampire nobility, human servants were often little more than possessions, status symbols to be displayed and discarded at whim. That Thomas had maintained his position, and more importantly, his life, for nearly a year marked him as exceptional. There is also this, Thomas said after a moment, changing the subject as he placed a different document before his master. The matter of the village at the western boundary. Lord Draken examined the parchment, which detailed tax collections from the surrounding territories. Humans living within his domain paid their tithe in currency, goods, and occasionally blood. It was an arrangement that had persisted for centuries, providing stability for the villagers and sustenance for their immortal lord. Their payment is incomplete, he observed, a dangerous edge entering his voice. There was a poor harvest, my lord. The early frost. Does frost feed me, Thomas? Lord Draken interrupted, rising from his chair in a fluid motion. Does it sustain the protection I provide against worse predators than myself? Thomas stood his ground, though Lord Draken could hear the quickening of the human's pulse, a symphony of fear and determination that sang in his predator's ears. No, my lord, but neither will there be future harvests if the villagers starve through winter. I thought perhaps an extension might be considered. Lord Draken moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape below. From this height, the village was merely a collection of tiny lights in the distance, fragile as fireflies against the vast darkness. How easy it would be to extinguish them all, to feed until gorged on their lifeblood. 6 centuries ago, he might have done exactly that without a second thought. But time had taught him the value of restraint, of cultivation rather than conquest. The humans under his protection were like a carefully tended garden, one that required patience and occasional mercy. You advocate for them quite passionately, he observed, turning back to study Thomas's face. One might almost think you care for their welfare. I was once among them, my lord, Thomas replied simply, before entering your service. This was not news to Lord Draken, who had personally selected Thomas from the annual tithe of servants offered up by the villages. Yet something in the human's tone gave him pause, a hint of complexity he had not bothered to consider before. Very well, he said at last. They shall have their extension, but come spring, I will collect what is owed, with interest. Relief flickered across Thomas's features before being carefully masked. I will convey your decision, my lord. As the human gathered the documents, Lord Drakon found his attention drawn to the graceful movements of Thomas's hands. Scholar's hands, with long fingers better suited to turning pages than performing the menial tasks required of a servant. A curious choice the young man had made, volunteering for service in the vampire's household. Most who came did so out of desperation or as sacrifices for their family's protection. "Tell me, Thomas," he said abruptly, "do you regret your decision to enter my service?" The question seemed to surprise the servant, who paused in his work. "No, my lord," he answered after a thoughtful moment. "I do not, even knowing what I am, what I have done through the centuries." Thomas met his gaze directly then, something few humans dared. "I came here by choice, with open eyes. The library alone made it worthwhile." A smile threatened at the corner of Lord Drakon's mouth. Of course, he had noticed how Thomas lingered among the bookshelves during his free hours, how volumes would be returned to slightly different positions. The human's hunger for knowledge was perhaps the one thing Lord Drakon could understand completely. "You may borrow whatever books interest you," he said, surprising himself with the offer, "provided your duties do not suffer." Thomas's face transformed with genuine pleasure, the first true smile Lord Drakon had witnessed from him. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, unexpected and strangely warming. "Thank you, my lord. I shall treasure the privilege." The clock on the mantel chimed 4 times, a reminder that dawn approached. Lord Drakon felt the familiar heaviness beginning to settle into his limbs, the lethargy that preceded the day's death-like sleep. "Come," he said. "It is time." They descended to the castle's lower levels, past rooms that had not been opened in centuries, down stone steps worn concave by the passage of countless feet. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of earth and ancient stone. Finally, they reached the antechamber to Lord Drakon's sleeping quarters, a room accessible only to himself and his most trusted servant. Thomas moved efficiently about the space, drawing heavy velvet curtains over windows that, despite being far underground, somehow still admitted the fatal rays of sunlight during day hours. He lit the black candles in their silver holders, their flames burning with an unnatural blue tint, part of the ancient wards that protected the vampire during his vulnerable hours. Lord Drakon shed his cloak, revealing a frame both powerful and elegant in its proportions. 6 centuries of undeath had neither withered nor bloated his form. Rather, he possessed the cold perfection of a marble statue, pale skin stretched over muscle and sinew that no longer aged or decayed. "Will there be anything else, my lord?" Thomas asked, carefully averting his eyes from his master's disrobing, a courtesy rather than a necessity, for Lord Drakon had long ago abandoned mortal modesty. "Yes," the vampire said, an impulse forming suddenly in his mind. "Read to me." Thomas looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "My lord?" "Select something from the shelf there and read," Lord Drakon clarified, gesturing to a small collection of books kept in the antechamber. "Your voice, it has a calming quality." If the request seemed strange to Thomas, he gave no indication beyond that initial surprise. He approached the bookshelf, fingers trailing over leather spines, before selecting a volume bound in deep burgundy. "Byron, my lord?" Lord Drakon nodded, settling onto the chaise positioned near his sleeping chamber's entrance. He had not asked a servant to read to him in how long? 2 centuries, perhaps more. Yet the prospect of entering his death-like slumber with Thomas's gentle voice in his ears suddenly seemed preferable to the usual silence. Thomas sat in the chair, positioned a respectful distance away, opening the book to a page marked with a silver ribbon. "She walks in beauty like the night," he began, his voice taking on a melodic quality that seemed to fill the chamber like music. "Of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." Lord Drakon closed his eyes, allowing the words to wash over him. Byron had been an interesting mortal, full of passion and darkness in equal measure. The vampire had met him briefly during the poet's travels in Greece, though Byron had never known his companion's true nature. The memory was sharp and clear, despite the intervening centuries. A gift and curse of immortality was the crystal precision of remembrance. As Thomas continued reading, Lord Draken found himself studying the human through half-lidded eyes. The candlelight played across Thomas's features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows. There was something compelling about his presence, something that stirred emotions long dormant in the vampire's chest. When Thomas reached the poem's end, he looked up to find his master watching him. Their eyes met for a long moment, and something indefinable passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or a question neither was prepared to voice. "Dawn approaches, my lord," Thomas said softly, breaking the silence. "You should rest." Lord Draken nodded, rising from the chaise. At the threshold of his sleeping chamber he paused. "Thomas?" "Yes, my lord?" "You will accompany me to Lady Bathory's gathering." It was not a request, and both knew it, yet Thomas's response held no resentment, only quiet acceptance. "As you wish, my lord." As Lord Draken sealed himself within his chamber, lying upon the ancient stone bier that had served as his resting place for centuries, he found himself dwelling on the image of Thomas's face in the candlelight. 600 years of existence had taught him to recognize danger in all its forms, and something about his growing fascination with the human servant whispered of peril more insidious than any he had faced before. For what greater threat could there be to an immortal who had purged himself of all weakness than the stirring of desires long thought dead and buried? The night of Lady Bathory's winter solstice gathering approached with the inevitability of twilight. For a fortnight, Castel Draken had been alive with preparations, an unusual flurry of activity disturbing its centuries of slumber. Thomas had overseen it all with quiet efficiency. The polishing of silver that hadn't seen use in decades, the airing of Lord Draken's formal attire, the procurement of fresh blood from the villages below, presented in crystal decanters rather than drawn directly from trembling necks, a concession to modern etiquette among the vampire nobility. Lord Draken observed these preparations with detached amusement, finding himself increasingly drawn to the library where Thomas spent his free hours. He would discover the human there, absorbed in ancient texts, lips moving silently as he translated languages dead to all but a handful of immortals. Occasionally, Lord Draken would speak, startling Thomas from his scholarly reverie, and they would converse about literature, history, philosophy, subjects the vampire had witnessed unfold firsthand through the centuries. "You have a peculiar fascination with the macabre," Lord Draken remarked one evening, finding Thomas engrossed in a grimoire detailing the various rituals of necromancy practiced during the Black Death. "Most humans shy away from such darkness." Thomas closed the book carefully, his fingers lingering on its worn cover. "Perhaps that's why I've survived in your service, my lord. I don't fear the darkness, I seek to understand it." "Understanding does not guarantee survival," Lord Draken replied, moving to stand by the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, large flakes drifting past the glass like ash. "Indeed, knowledge has led many to their doom." "Is that a warning?" Thomas asked, his voice calm despite the quickening pulse that betrayed his awareness of their isolation. Lord Draken turned, studying the human, with eyes that had witnessed empires crumble to dust. "Call it an observation. You seek knowledge of my kind with unusual fervor." "I seek knowledge of all kinds," Thomas countered, rising from his chair. In the firelight, his features appeared sharper, more defined. "Your library contains wisdom gathered across centuries. How could I not avail myself of it?" "There are books here that would destroy a mortal mind," Lord Draken said softly. "Texts bound in human skin, written in blood ink, containing truths that shatter sanity." Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "Yet you have read them and retained your faculties." "I am not human." "No," Thomas agreed, a curious smile touching his lips. "But you were once. That's what separates you from the darkness you command, the memory of humanity." The observation struck Lord Dracon like a physical blow. How long had it been since anyone had dared speak to him thus? Not as a monster to be feared or a power to be placated, but as a being with a past, with memories that stretched back to mortal days. "You presume much?" he said finally, his voice low. "Forgive me, my lord," Thomas replied, bowing his head slightly. "I spoke out of turn." Lord Dracon waved away the apology, finding himself strangely reluctant to end their conversation. "It is refreshing at times to be addressed without the tedious formality of court. Tell me what draws you to these particular texts." Relief flickered across Thomas's face. "I believe knowledge is power, my lord, and in your world I am powerless. Yet here you stand conversing with me as an equal. A temporary courtesy that could end at your whim," Thomas pointed out. "I harbor no illusions about my position." The vampire found himself smiling, an expression that felt foreign on features long schooled to aristocratic indifference. "Prudent, though it raises the question of why you volunteered for service here, knowing the precariousness of your situation." Thomas hesitated, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "My reasons were complex. Few decisions worth making are simple," Lord Dracon observed. "Were you running towards something or away from it?" "Both, perhaps," Thomas admitted. "The village offered little future for someone of my interests. And what interests might those be, beyond ancient texts and serving a creature most humans would gladly see destroyed?" Thomas's eyes met his, clear and unafraid. "Understanding the nature of immortality, the price of it, whether the cost is worth the reward." Something cold slithered down Lord Dracon's spine. Not fear, for he had transcended such mortal weaknesses centuries ago, but a primal recognition of danger. For the first time, he wondered if he had misjudged Thomas Blackwood entirely. "A philosophical pursuit," he said carefully. "Of course, my lord," Thomas replied, his expression once again the perfect mask of devoted servitude. "What other purpose could it serve?" Before Lord Dracon could respond, the heavy toll of the castle's ancient bell sounded through the corridors, signalling the arrival of sunset. With the gathering at Lady Bathory's estate only hours away, their conversation would have to wait. "We depart within the hour," Lord Dracon said, moving toward the door. "Be ready." "As you command, my lord," Thomas replied. But as the vampire left the library, he could not shake the sensation of having revealed more than he had discovered, a novel and disconcerting experience for one who had mastered the art of manipulation before Columbus set sail for the New World. The journey to Lady Bathory's estate took them through mountain passes rendered treacherous by winter, though such dangers concerned Lord Dracon little. The black carriage, pulled by stallions whose eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, navigated the snow-covered roads with unnatural surety. Inside, Lord Dracon sat across from Thomas, the space between them filled with silent tension. "You will stay close to me during the gathering," Lord Dracon instructed as they approached their destination. "The others of my kind view humans as little more than cattle. Your status as my personal servant offers some protection, but it is not absolute." Thomas nodded, adjusting the high collar of the formal attire Lord Dracon had provided, black velvet with silver embroidery, elegant yet clearly marking him as property. "I understand, my lord. Lady Bathory in particular has unusual appetites," the vampire continued. "She believes bathing in the blood of young men preserves her beauty." "Does it?" Thomas asked, a genuine scholarly curiosity in his voice that nearly made Lord Dracon laugh. "No. Elizabeth clings to mortal superstitions, despite having transcended mortality 4 centuries ago. Her vanity remains her greatest weakness." The carriage began to slow as they approached a sprawling estate perched on a cliff overlooking a frozen lake. Unlike Castel Dracon's ancient severity, Lady Bathory's residence was a Baroque fantasy of spires and ornate stonework, every surface gilded or carved into grotesque figures that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. "Remember," Lord Dracon said as the carriage came to a stop, Speak only when addressed directly. Keep your eyes lowered in the presence of the others, and under no circumstances allow yourself to be separated from me. You sound concerned for my welfare, my lord, Thomas observed, a hint of surprise in his voice. Lord Draken's expression hardened. You are my property. I protect what is mine. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, but he merely nodded. Of course, my lord. They were met at the entrance by a servant whose pallor and vacant expression marked him as enthralled, a human whose will had been completely subjugated through repeated feeding. Lord Draken felt Thomas tense beside him at the sight, though the human betrayed no outward reaction. The great hall of Lady Bathory's estate was ablaze with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off mirrors positioned to create the illusion of daylight, a mocking reminder of what all vampires had sacrificed. Dozens of immortals glided across the marble floor, their movements too graceful to be human, their conversations a melodic murmur in languages long dead to the mortal world. Lord Draken, a musical voice called out, and the crowd parted to reveal their hostess. Lady Elizabeth Bathory appeared no older than 30, her beauty the cold perfection of a porcelain doll. Her gown, crimson as fresh blood, clung to her form before pooling at her feet like a spreading stain. Dark hair piled atop her head was secured with pins tipped with what appeared to be human teeth, polished to a pearly gleam. Elizabeth, Lord Draken acknowledged, inclining his head slightly, the barest courtesy he could offer without causing offense. Your invitation was unexpected. The decades grow tedious without occasional society, she replied, her gaze sliding to Thomas with predatory interest. And I see you've brought your pet. How delightful. Thomas bowed low, the perfect picture of subservience, though Lord Draken could sense the tension in his frame. Thomas is not for sharing, Lord Draken stated flatly. He attends me in an official capacity. Lady Bathory's laugh was like glass breaking. So protective. One might almost think you've developed an attachment to this one. One might think many things, Elizabeth, few of them accurate. Her smile never wavered, though her eyes hardened to chips of ice. Come, the others are eager to see you. It has been, how long? 50 years since you last graced us with your presence? 73, Lord Draken corrected. The gathering in Vienna, during what the mortals called their Great War. Ah, yes, she sighed, taking his arm and leading him deeper into the hall. Such delicious chaos that was, so much blood freely spilled. Hardly sporting, but certainly convenient. Thomas followed at a respectful distance, his eyes carefully lowered, though Lord Draken suspected he missed nothing. The gathering was indeed attended by representatives of all 13 vampire bloodlines, some so ancient they appeared more statue than being, their movements minimal and deliberate, as if physical form had become a burden they wore with reluctance. "Lord Draken!" wheezed Count Orlok, his corpse-like face splitting in a grimace that might have been intended as a smile. "We had wagered you would ignore the summons. I have lost a century of servitude from my newest progeny on your account." "Your gambling habits are not my concern, Orlok," Lord Draken replied coolly. "Why has Elizabeth gathered us? Surely not for mere socializing." The ancient vampire's rheumy eyes darted around the hall. "There are whispers of a new hunter, one with knowledge of our weaknesses, our hiding places. 3 of the lesser bloodlines have lost elders in the past year." Lord Draken frowned. Vampire hunters were a constant nuisance throughout history, but few managed to target elders successfully. Such creatures had survived centuries by developing preternatural instincts for danger. "Has the Council investigated?" he asked, referring to the shadowy governing body that maintained order among their kind. "The Council grows complacent," Lady Bathory interjected, returning with goblets of blood for her guests. "They believe it to be the work of rogue vampires, not hunters. Internal politics rather than external threat." Lord Draken accepted the goblet but did not drink, aware of Thomas standing silently behind him. "And your opinion, Elizabeth?" Her crimson lips curled into a smile. "I believe someone has betrayed us. Someone with intimate knowledge of our kind. The attacks are too precise, too informed. You suspect one of our own has turned traitor?" "Perhaps," she murmured, her gaze sliding past him to Thomas. "Or perhaps one of our trusted servants has been less than loyal." Lord Draken felt, rather than saw, Thomas stiffen. "My household is beyond reproach," he said coldly. "Is it?" Lady Bathory raised a perfect eyebrow. "Your human has been in your service for what? A year? Scarcely time to ensure true loyalty, especially for one so inquisitive." Ice formed in Lord Draken's veins. "Explain yourself." "Merely an observation," she purred. "Your Thomas has been asking questions of my enthralled servants. Questions about the locations of elder vampires' resting places, about weaknesses particular to certain bloodlines. Academic curiosity, I'm sure." Lord Draken turned to Thomas, whose face had gone pale. "My lord, Not here," Lord Draken cut him off, his voice deadly quiet. To Lady Bathory he added, "Your concern is noted, Elizabeth. I will address it personally." Her smile was triumphant. "See that you do. The Council would take a dim view of any elder who harbored a potential hunter, regardless of their sentimental attachments." The remainder of the gathering passed in a blur of tense conversations and political maneuvering. Lord Draken found himself repeatedly drawn into discussions about the mysterious attacks, each elder seeming to harbor suspicions about different bloodlines. Through it all, Thomas remained at his side, silent and pale, his earlier composure shattered by Lady Bathory's accusation. It was nearly dawn when they finally took their leave. The return journey conducted in frigid silence. Only when they were halfway back to Castel Dracon did Lord Draken finally speak. "Explain yourself," he commanded, his voice devoid of the warmth that had characterized their recent interactions. Thomas raised his eyes, no longer the deferential servant, but a man facing judgment. "I have been researching vampire weaknesses," he admitted, "but not for the purpose Lady Bathory implied." "What purpose, then?" Lord Draken's voice was soft, dangerous. "To understand," Thomas said simply, "to know what you truly are beyond myth and superstition." "And the inquiries about elder resting places?" Thomas hesitated, and Lord Draken could hear his heart racing. "I sought to understand the security measures different vampires employ. Your own are unusual in their complexity." "You've been studying me," Lord Draken realized. Anger and something else, something dangerously close to hurt, twisting within him. "For what purpose, Thomas? What game are you playing?" "It's not a game, my lord," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "I came to your service with a purpose, yes, but not the one Lady Bathory suggests." "Then what purpose?" Lord Draken demanded, leaning forward until their faces were inches apart. "The truth, Thomas. Now." Thomas met his gaze, and for the first time, Lord Draken saw what lay behind the human's careful composure, determination, curiosity, and something deeper, more complex. "I am searching for a cure," Thomas whispered. "A way to reverse vampirism." The words hung between them, impossible and audacious. Lord Draken found himself speechless, centuries of existence having failed to prepare him for such a declaration. "A cure," he repeated finally, tasting the foreign concept. "You believe such a thing exists?" "I believe it might be possible," Thomas said, gaining confidence as Lord Draken hadn't immediately killed him. "There are references in ancient texts, obscure passages in grimoires, and forbidden manuscripts, suggesting that under certain circumstances the transformation can be undone." Lord Draken laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "And you think I desire such a thing? That after 6 centuries of power and immortality, I would choose to become human again? Weak, mortal, doomed to age and die within decades?" Thomas's expression was earnest, almost pleading. "I've watched you, my lord. Seen how you look at human families in the village? Heard you speak Katerina's name in your sleep during the day's rest? You remember what it was to love, to feel connection. Immortality has given you power, but at what cost? The carriage had arrived at Castel Dracon, but neither man moved to exit. In the confined space, Lord Draken could smell Thomas's fear mingled with something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. You presume to know my mind, Lord Draken said softly. My desires. I presume to offer a choice, Thomas corrected, one you haven't had in 6 centuries. Lord Draken studied the human before him, this puzzling creature who had walked willingly into a monster's lair with dreams of redemption. And if I told you I have no desire to be cured, that I embrace what I am, then I would accept your decision, Thomas replied. But I would ask if it is truly your desire, or merely the result of believing no alternative exists. The question struck at something buried deep within Lord Draken's chest, a doubt he had suppressed for centuries, a wondering that surfaced in the moments before dawn, when memories of his mortal life seemed most vivid. What would it be to feel the sun's warmth again, to taste food and wine as more than ash on his tongue? To age alongside someone beloved, sharing the precious fragility of mortal existence? Your research, he said finally. How far has it progressed? Thomas's expression brightened with cautious hope. I've identified several potential rituals, but many components remain unclear. The texts are fragmented, contradictory. I need access to more sources, possibly artifacts mentioned in the grimoires. Dangerous artifacts, Lord Draken guessed. Items the Council would have hidden or destroyed. Yes, Thomas admitted, and I would need willing participation. The vampire must desire the change for any chance of success. Lord Draken opened the carriage door, stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness. Come, dawn approaches, and we have much to discuss. They entered the castle in silence, moving through corridors that seemed suddenly foreign to Lord Draken, as if seeing them through new eyes, the eyes of a creature contemplating mortality after centuries of undeath. In his private study, Lord Draken poured himself a goblet of blood, contemplating its crimson depths. Lady Bathory's accusation places you in danger, he said finally. If the Council believes a hunter operates among us, they will investigate all unusual servants in elder households. I understand, Thomas said quietly. Perhaps it would be best if I left your service, at least temporarily. No, the word emerged sharper than intended. That would only confirm their suspicions. Besides, you would not survive a day without my protection, not now that Elizabeth has marked you. Thomas stepped closer, his heartbeat a distracting rhythm. Then what do you suggest, my lord? Lord Draken turned, studying the human who had dared to offer him the impossible, a return to the life he had abandoned 6 centuries ago. We will continue your research, but with caution, and we will investigate these attacks ourselves. If there truly is a hunter targeting elders, finding them may earn enough goodwill from the Council to protect you. And if we find this cure? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What then? Lord Draken set down his untouched goblet. I make no promises, Thomas. 6 centuries of existence cannot be discarded on a whim, but I will consider the possibility. The smile that bloomed on Thomas's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, painful in its beauty. That is all I ask, my lord. As Lord Draken prepared for his day's rest, he found himself haunted by possibilities long thought extinguished. The idea of mortality, of vulnerability, of change, of eventual death, both terrified and tantalized him. And beneath these contemplations lurked a more disturbing question. Why did Thomas Blackwood care so deeply about redeeming a creature most humans would gladly destroy? What did this enigmatic servant truly want? And what price would Lord Draken ultimately pay for indulging his curiosity? The questions followed him into his chamber, where dreams of Katerina waited. And now, inexplicably, dreams of Thomas as well, his earnest eyes offering something Lord Draken had abandoned hope of ever finding again: redemption. As the winter deepened, Castel Dracon transformed into a sanctuary of forbidden knowledge. Lord Dracon opened sections of his library that had remained sealed for centuries, revealing grimoires bound in materials Thomas dared not identify, and scrolls inscribed with symbols that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of one's eye. Together, master and servant pored over these texts by candlelight, searching for fragments of the ritual that might reverse vampirism. "This passage mentions the blood of the Maker returned freely," Thomas said one night, looking up from a crumbling manuscript. His face was gaunt from weeks of insufficient sleep, but his eyes burned with scholarly fervor. "Does that mean the blood of the vampire who turned you?" Lord Dracon's expression darkened. "If so, then our search ends here. My Maker has been dust for 5 centuries. "Perhaps it's metaphorical," Thomas suggested, making notes in his journal. The volume had grown thick with observations, diagrams, and fragments of ancient languages. A symbolic return of what was taken. Lord Dracon moved to the window, gazing at the moonlit landscape below. The snow-covered mountains gleamed like bones beneath the stars, beautiful and indifferent to the creatures that dwelled in their shadow. "You still haven't told me why this matters to you," he said quietly. "Why risk your life to restore my humanity?" Thomas carefully closed the manuscript, avoiding Lord Dracon's penetrating gaze. "Every man needs a purpose," he said finally. "This is mine, a purpose that could see you executed by the Council," Lord Dracon reminded him. 3 more elders have been destroyed since Lady Bathory's gathering. The whispers of a traitor grow louder. "All the more reason to accelerate our research," Thomas replied, rising to retrieve another text. As he reached for a volume on a high shelf, his sleeve fell back, revealing a pattern of scars on his forearm, deliberate marks that Lord Dracon recognized immediately as an ancient binding sigil. Moving with preternatural speed, Lord Dracon seized Thomas's arm, pushing the sleeve higher to expose the full pattern. "What is this?" he demanded, though he already knew the answer. Thomas did not struggle, though his pulse quickened beneath Lord Dracon's cold fingers. "A reminder," he said softly. "Of what?" Lord Dracon's voice was dangerously quiet. "Of why I came here." Thomas met his gaze steadily, no longer the deferential servant, but a man with purpose. "My family served vampire hunters for generations, my lord. I was raised to destroy your kind." The admission hung between them like a blade. Lord Dracon released Thomas's arm as if burned, a cold fury building in his chest. "You lied to me." "I omitted," Thomas corrected, "and I have not betrayed you." "You expect me to believe that?" Lord Dracon's voice rose, the windows rattling slightly with the force of his anger. "That a hunter's descendant entered my service with benevolent intentions." "I entered your service to understand," Thomas said, his composure remarkable in the face of immortal rage. "My family's lore painted vampires as mindless predators, evil without redemption. But the texts spoke of a transformation, not just of body, but of soul. I needed to know if that soul could be reclaimed." Lord Dracon laughed bitterly. "So I am your research subject? Your theological experiment?" "You were," Thomas admitted. At first, the simple admission silenced Lord Dracon more effectively than any denial could have. "And now?" he asked, his voice stripped of its usual commanding tone. Thomas stepped closer, either very brave or very foolish. "Now I know you, Alaric Valerian Dracon. I've watched you show mercy to villagers who could not meet their tithe. I've seen you stand for hours before Katerina's portrait, speaking to her in languages I cannot understand. I've observed your respect for knowledge, for beauty, for the life you once had." He gestured to the library around them. "A mindless predator does not preserve poetry. A soulless monster does not remember love after 6 centuries. You are more than what your transformation made you, and that is why I believe you deserve the choice to reclaim your humanity, if such a thing is possible." Lord Dracon turned away, his immortal composure shaken by the human's words. "And the other elders who have been destroyed? What do you know of that?" "Nothing," Thomas insisted. "I swear it." "But—" he hesitated. "Speak," Lord Draken commanded. "The pattern of the attacks," Thomas said carefully. "They target elders who have completely embraced their predatory nature. Those who kill indiscriminately, who create vampires without thought to the consequences. The kind my family would have hunted." "You think another hunter is at work," Lord Draken concluded. "One with inside knowledge," Thomas agreed. "Someone with access to the Council's records, perhaps. The attacks are too precise to be random." Lord Draken paced the length of the library, his mind racing through possibilities. "If what you say is true, then Lady Bathory would be a likely target. Her appetites are legendary, even among our kind. Yet she lives," Thomas pointed out. "Protected, perhaps, by her political connections within the Council. Or by something else," Lord Draken mused. A suspicion was forming in his mind, one too dangerous to voice without evidence. "I need to examine the sites of the recent attacks. There may be patterns we cannot discern from reports alone." "We cannot leave now," Thomas protested. "Dawn is only hours away, and the nearest attack site is 2 days' journey, even by your fastest methods." "I will go alone," Lord Draken decided. "You will remain here continuing our research." Thomas stepped forward, alarm clear in his expression. "My lord, if another elder has been targeted, it's too dangerous." "I have survived 6 centuries, Thomas," Lord Draken interrupted. "I did not achieve that through recklessness. I will observe only and return before you have time to miss my presence." "And if you don't return?" Thomas asked quietly. Lord Draken paused at the door. "Then burn my library and flee. The knowledge contained here would be worth your life to the Council if I were destroyed." Before Thomas could respond, Lord Draken swept from the room, his decision made. If his suspicions were correct, then the danger was far greater than a rogue hunter, and Thomas's presence in his household suddenly made terrible sense. Lord Draken returned 3 nights later, his cloak tattered and his expression grim. Thomas met him in the great hall, relief evident in his face, despite his attempt at composure. "You're injured," Thomas observed, noting the way Lord Draken favored his left side. "A disagreement with Lady Bathory's guards," the vampire replied dismissively. "She was most displeased by my unannounced visit." "Elizabeth?" Thomas followed as Lord Draken strode toward his private chambers. "Why would you confront her directly?" Lord Draken waited until they were securely behind closed doors before answering. "Because she is responsible for the attacks on the elders," he said flatly, "though not in the way the Council suspects." Thomas's eyes widened. "She's working with hunters." "She is the hunter," Lord Draken corrected, removing his cloak to reveal a vicious wound in his side, the flesh blackened and smoking slightly. "Or rather, she has created her own hunters, vampire-human hybrids, forbidden by Council law for millennia." "Dhampirs," Thomas breathed, the color draining from his face. "I thought they were myths." "Most are," Lord Draken agreed grimly. "The creation process is complex and usually fatal to both vampire and human participants, but Elizabeth has always had a talent for blood magic. It seems she has perfected a method." Thomas moved to examine the wound, his scholarly detachment momentarily replaced by genuine concern. "This needs treatment." The weapon was silver, blessed silver, mixed with ash from a destroyed elder, Lord Draken confirmed. "A particularly nasty innovation. Had I been a younger vampire, it would have been fatal." As Thomas gathered supplies to treat the wound, Lord Draken continued his explanation. "Elizabeth is systematically eliminating her rivals within the elder hierarchy. Each destroyed vampire increases her standing in the Council. Eventually, she means to rule." "And the Dhampirs?" Thomas asked, returning with herbs and ointments from Lord Draken's personal stores. "Expendable tools," the vampire replied bitterly. "Created to serve her purpose, and then destroyed when they've outlived their usefulness. They have vampire strength and speed, but can walk in daylight. The perfect assassins." "Did she see you?" Thomas asked, carefully cleaning the wound. His hands were gentle despite the grim conversation. Unfortunately, yes. Lord Draken winced slightly as Thomas applied a poultice to the blackened flesh. I was discovered while examining her laboratory. She will come for me next, likely at her earliest opportunity. Thomas's hands stilled. Here, she would attack Castel Draken directly. She has 3 Dhampirs at her command, Lord Draken said grimly, and I have injured her pride as well as exposed her secret. Yes, she will come. And soon. For a moment, silence filled the chamber as the implications settled between them. Then Thomas resumed his ministrations, his jaw set with determination. Then we must be ready, he said simply. Lord Draken studied the human's face, searching for signs of fear or duplicity and finding only resolve. You still haven't told me everything about why you're here, Thomas Blackwood, he said softly. I can smell secrets on you like perfume. Thomas secured the bandage over the wound before meeting Lord Draken's gaze. We all have secrets, my lord, he replied. Would learning mine change what we must do now? Perhaps not, Lord Draken conceded. But trust is a rare commodity in these times. If we are to survive Elizabeth's vendetta, I must know where you truly stand. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached into his shirt and withdrew a pendant hanging from a chain around his neck, a small silver vial sealed with wax. What is that? Lord Draken asked, though something in him already knew, a recognition that transcended conscious thought. Blood, Thomas said quietly. Katerina's blood. The world seemed to stop. For the first time in centuries, Lord Draken felt something akin to mortal shock, a cold wave that momentarily paralyzed both thought and movement. Impossible, he whispered. Katerina died over 6 centuries ago. She did, Thomas agreed, but her blood was preserved by your maker, and then by those who destroyed him. It has passed through my family line for generations, protected by spells of preservation. Why? Lord Draken demanded, his voice hoarse with emotions long suppressed. Why would your family keep such a thing? Because it was prophesied, Thomas said simply, that one day a descendant of the Blackwood line would offer Katerina's blood back to Lord Draken, and in doing so, break the curse of vampirism that has plagued these mountains for centuries. Lord Draken stared at the vial, memories crashing over him like ocean waves. Katerina's laugh, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her skin against his. Then the plague, watching helplessly as she withered, making his desperate pact with darkness to escape the same fate. This is why you sought the ritual, he realized. You already had the key component. Thomas nodded. The blood of the beloved, freely returned. Not your maker's blood, but the blood of what you loved most as a mortal man. The texts were clear once I understood the symbolism. And you believe this will work? Lord Draken asked, unable to mask the tremor in his voice. That drinking her blood will reverse 6 centuries of undeath? I believe it is possible, Thomas replied cautiously. The ritual requires other components, including your willing participation. Your desire to return to humanity must be genuine, my lord. Lord Draken turned away, moving to the window where the first hints of pre-dawn light were appearing on the horizon. And if I choose to remain as I am, then I have failed my purpose, Thomas said simply. But the choice must be yours. That is essential to the ritual and to the prophecy. The vampire laughed softly without humor. Choice, such a human concept. I chose this existence once to escape death, to live forever with Katerina's memory when I could not have her in life. And has it brought you peace? Thomas asked quietly. Lord Draken's silence was answer enough. We have little time, Thomas continued. If Lady Bathory comes as you predict, the ritual must be completed before then. In your weakened state, you cannot face 3 Dhampirs alone. As a newly mortal man, I could not face them at all, Lord Draken pointed out. No, Thomas agreed, but a mortal man is not bound by the same mystical laws as a vampire. You could flee Castel Dracon, start anew elsewhere, live the life that was stolen from you. Lord Dracon turned, studying Thomas with new intensity. And what would you gain from this, Thomas Blackwood? If the prophecy is fulfilled, what becomes of you? A shadow passed over Thomas's face, quickly concealed. My family's obligation would be complete, he said carefully. The blood debt repaid. Blood debt? Lord Dracon stepped closer, catching Thomas's chin and forcing him to meet his gaze. What blood debt does your family owe mine? Thomas swallowed, his pulse quickening beneath Lord Dracon's cold fingers. It was a Blackwood who led your maker to Katerina, he whispered. My ancestor. He served your maker, guided him to your village during the plague. He was there the night you made your bargain with darkness. The revelation struck Lord Dracon like a physical blow. Your family betrayed mine, he said, his voice deadly quiet. And now you seek absolution through this ritual. My family has sought to right that wrong for generations, Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. The prophecy was our penance, passed down through centuries. I am the one chosen to fulfill it, to offer you back what was taken. Lord Dracon released him, turning away as ancient rage warred with more complex emotions. 6 centuries of existence had taught him the futility of vengeance, the hollow satisfaction it provided. And beneath his anger lay something more unsettling, a growing affection for Thomas that defied rational explanation. If this ritual fails, he said finally, the consequences could be worse than remaining as I am. The texts speak of agony, of half-transformations that leave the subject trapped between worlds. Yes, Thomas admitted, the risk is significant, but so is the reward. Lord Dracon gazed out at the lightening sky, feeling the familiar lethargy that preceded his daytime dormancy beginning to settle into his limbs. I will consider it, he said finally. Return to me at sunset with everything required for the ritual. I will give you my answer then. As Thomas bowed and departed, Lord Dracon remained at the window, watching the horizon brighten with the dawn he had not truly seen in 6 centuries. The possibility of mortality, of sunlight and breath and heartbeat, called to something buried deep within him, a humanity he had thought long extinguished. But as he retired to his chamber, sealing himself within its protective darkness, doubt followed him like a shadow. Could he trust Thomas Blackwood, descendant of the man who had betrayed Katerina to darkness? Was this ritual truly an offer of redemption, or a more elaborate betrayal? And beneath these questions lay a deeper fear. After 6 centuries as a creature of darkness, was there enough humanity left within him to reclaim? As the death-like sleep of day claimed him, Lord Dracon's last conscious thought was of Thomas's face, earnest, determined, and hiding secrets still unnamed. By sunset, he would need to decide whether those secrets concealed salvation or destruction. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Lady Bathory was gathering her Dhampir assassins, preparing to eliminate the elder who had discovered her ambition. The hours of daylight were ticking away, bringing both decision and danger ever closer to Castel Dracon. The night fell over Castel Dracon like a funeral shroud, the last rays of daylight surrendering to darkness as Lord Dracon awakened from his death-like slumber. For perhaps the final time, he felt the familiar transformation, the blood beginning to flow through long-dead veins, the sharpening of senses that allowed him to hear the castle settling around him, to smell the ancient stones, and more pointedly, to detect Thomas's presence just beyond his chamber door. The human's heartbeat had become as familiar to Lord Dracon as the rhythm of the seasons, a sound he could distinguish among thousands. Tonight it raced with anticipation and fear, a symphony of mortality that might soon become his own once more. "Enter!" he commanded, his voice carrying easily through the heavy oak door. Thomas appeared, bearing a silver tray laden with artifacts gathered from the farthest reaches of the castle's collection. A chalice of obsidian rimmed with ancient inscriptions, herbs that had not grown in these mountains for centuries, and at the center, the small vial containing Katerina's preserved blood, the key to his possible redemption. "You've decided, then?" Thomas asked, setting the tray upon a table of blackened wood, carved with symbols no living scholar could translate. Lord Dracon moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain to reveal a night sky scattered with stars like diamonds flung across black velvet. 604 years ago, he said quietly, I chose darkness over death. I was young, terrified of the plague consuming my beloved, willing to make any bargain that would grant me more time with her memory. He turned to face Thomas, his garnet eyes reflecting the candlelight. But time is a crueler master than death. Memory becomes both treasure and torment when stretched across centuries. I have watched civilizations rise and fall, seen wonders and horrors beyond mortal comprehension, and through it all I have remained unchanged, a monument to what was lost rather than what might be gained. Thomas approached cautiously, stopping an arm's length away. "And now, my lord? Do you choose differently?" "I choose possibility," Lord Dracon replied, his gaze falling to the vial of blood. "The possibility of change, of growth, the possibility of feeling the sun's warmth once more, of tasting food and wine as more than ash, the possibility of an ending when the time comes for what gives life meaning, if not its finite nature." Relief flooded Thomas's expression before being carefully masked. "Then we should begin. Lady Bathory will not wait long to strike, and the ritual requires precise timing." As Thomas prepared the elements, Lord Dracon found himself studying the human with new intensity, noting details he had overlooked despite months of close observation. The small scar at Thomas's temple, likely from childhood, the slight calluses on his scholar's hands, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked. Mortal details, ephemeral and precious. "There is something I must know, Thomas," Lord Dracon said, as the human measured dried herbs into the obsidian chalice. "When this is complete, if I am mortal once more, what becomes of us?" Thomas's hand stilled momentarily, betraying surprise at the question. "I had assumed you would wish to leave these mountains," he said carefully, "begin anew somewhere untouched by memories of what you were." "And you?" Lord Dracon pressed. "Where will you go when your family's prophecy is fulfilled?" A shadow passed over Thomas's face. "I hadn't thought beyond completing my task," he admitted. "Perhaps I too would seek a new beginning." "Together?" The word escaped before Lord Dracon could reconsider it, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Thomas looked up then, meeting Lord Dracon's gaze directly. "Is that what you would wish, my lord?" "Alaric," the vampire corrected softly. "If I am to be a man again, I would hear my name on the lips of those who matter to me." The flush that colored Thomas's cheeks would once have triggered bloodlust in Lord Dracon. Now it stirred something warmer, more human. "Alaric, then," Thomas murmured, and the sound of his name, spoken so intimately, sent a shiver through the vampire's immortal frame. Before either could speak further, a sound from the castle's lower levels shattered the moment, breaking glass, followed by the soft thud of bodies moving with inhuman speed. Lord Dracon tensed, his preternatural senses extending throughout the castle. "They're here," he hissed. "Bathory's Dhampirs, 3 of them, approaching from different directions." Thomas's face paled, but his hands remained steady as he continued preparing the ritual. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, perhaps less," Lord Dracon replied grimly. "They move almost as quickly as full vampires, and they will not be hindered by the castle's protective wards." "Then we must accelerate the ritual," Thomas declared, his scholarly demeanor giving way to determination. "It will be more dangerous, the transition more violent, but we have no choice." Lord Dracon nodded, shedding his formal robe to stand in a simple black shirt and trousers. "Tell me what must be done." Thomas worked with frantic precision, completing the mixture in the chalice before adding 3 drops from the vial of Katerina's blood. The liquid inside began to smoke slightly, emitting a scent like summer roses mingled with iron. "You must drink this," Thomas instructed. "Then speak the words I taught you, the renunciation of darkness and the embrace of mortality. As you finish, I will add the remaining blood from the vial. The transition will begin immediately." "And how long will it take?" Lord Drakon asked, acutely aware of the sounds of intruders drawing closer. "Impossible to say," Thomas admitted. "The texts suggest anywhere from moments to hours, depending on the vampire's age and power. For one as ancient as you—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Lord Drakon's transition would be neither quick nor painless. "We cannot wait for it to complete," the vampire decided. "As soon as the ritual begins, you must flee. Take the hidden passage behind the library that leads to the village. Do not stop. Do not look back. I will not leave you," Thomas protested. "You must," Lord Drakon insisted, catching Thomas's wrist with gentle but immovable force. "This was always your purpose, was it not? To offer redemption, to fulfill the prophecy, not to die alongside a creature half transformed." Conflict warred in Thomas's expression. "There is more," he confessed hurriedly, "more that I should have told you." "Later," Lord Drakon said firmly, releasing him as the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. "Whatever secrets remain between us must wait. Begin the ritual, Thomas." With trembling hands, Thomas offered the chalice. Lord Drakon took it, his fingers brushing against Thomas's in a moment of contact that felt strangely significant. Their eyes met, centuries of existence gazing into the brief, bright flame of mortal life. "Vitam ex morte," Lord Drakon murmured, "life from death," before raising the chalice to his lips and drinking deeply. The liquid burned like fire and ice simultaneously, searing down his throat to pool in his stomach. For a moment, nothing happened, and Lord Drakon felt a flicker of doubt. Had they misunderstood the ritual? Was redemption truly beyond his reach? Then pain exploded through his body, a white-hot agony that drove him to his knees. He was dimly aware of Thomas kneeling beside him, supporting his weight as he began to recite the words of renunciation in a language that predated Rome. "I, Alaric Valerian Drakon, reject the gift of darkness. I surrender immortality, power, and timelessness. I embrace the light, mortality, and the precious limitation of human days. I reclaim my soul from the shadows and step once more into the realm of men." As the final words left his lips, Thomas unstoppered the vial and poured the remaining drops of Katerina's blood onto Lord Drakon's tongue. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every cell in his body seemed to ignite, his very essence torn between what he had been for centuries and what he had once been born as. He heard himself scream, a sound no human throat could produce. Through vision blurred with agony, he saw Thomas backing away, horror and hope mingled in his expression. Then the door to the chamber burst inward, and 3 figures entered with the fluid grace of predators. The Dhampirs, 2 male, 1 female, regarded the scene with cold calculation. They were beautiful in the way of their vampire parentage, but their eyes held a clarity no undead creature possessed. In the female's hand, a silver blade gleamed with deadly purpose. "How convenient," she remarked, her voice musical and merciless. "Lady Bathory will be pleased that we found him already incapacitated." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Lord Drakon and the intruders. "You're too late," he declared. "The transformation has begun. He will soon be mortal, beyond your mistress's concern." The female Dhampir laughed, the sound like crystal breaking. "Foolish human. Lady Bathory doesn't care what form he takes, only that his existence ends tonight." She moved with blinding speed, but Thomas was prepared. From beneath his cloak, he withdrew a weapon Lord Drakon had never seen in his possession, a short blade, etched with symbols similar to those on the binding sigil, scarred into his arm. As the Dhampir's silver knife descended, Thomas parried with unexpected skill, his movements suggesting years of training. "Surprised?" he called to Lord Dracon over his shoulder. "A Blackwood is more than a scholar, more than a servant. We have been hunters and protectors for generations." Lord Dracon could barely process Thomas's words through the haze of pain enveloping him. His body was changing, centuries of unnatural preservation unraveling cell by cell. He could feel his heart stuttering in his chest, attempting to resume a rhythm abandoned 600 years ago. His lungs burned as they struggled to draw breath, no longer needed for speech, but now essential for life. Through it all, he watched as Thomas fought with the desperate courage of a man defending something precious. The human was skilled, but outnumbered and outmatched. The female Dhampir landed a slash across his arm, drawing a line of crimson that scented the air with copper and salt. One of the males circled behind, preparing to strike. With the last reserves of his vampiric strength, Lord Dracon lunged forward, intercepting the male Dhampir and driving him into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. The effort sent a fresh wave of agony through his transforming body, but bought Thomas precious seconds to reposition. "Run!" Lord Dracon gasped, his voice already changing, losing the resonant power of the undead. "You cannot save me and yourself. I didn't come this far to abandon you now," Thomas replied, ducking beneath the female's blade and delivering a cut to her thigh that made her hiss in pain. The second male Dhampir seized Lord Dracon from behind, pinning arms that grew weaker with each passing moment. He felt fangs, not the pure vampire's elegant canines, but hybrid abominations, pierce his neck, seeking the last of his immortal blood. As his vision dimmed, Lord Dracon saw Thomas dispatch the wounded female with a thrust through the heart, her body crumbling to ash more slowly than a true vampire's would. The human turned, eyes widening at the sight of Lord Dracon in the Dhampir's grasp. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Thomas lunged forward, blade extended. Lord Dracon felt the Dhampir's grip loosen as the weapon found its mark, piercing through the creature's back to emerge from its chest. But in its death throes, the Dhampir's hand closed around Thomas's throat, dragging him forward with unnatural strength. Lord Dracon collapsed to the floor as the Dhampir released him, his body too far into transformation to maintain its feet. Through vision that grew more human, more limited with each heartbeat, he watched in horror as Thomas struggled in the dying creature's grip. With a final surge of hatred, the Dhampir drove its silver knife into Thomas's chest before dissolving into ash. "No!" The cry tore from Lord Dracon's throat, fully human now in its anguish. He crawled forward as Thomas crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across his shirt in a crimson bloom. "Thomas, no!" He gathered the human into his arms, cradling him with hands that had lost their immortal chill. Thomas's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Lord Dracon's face with effort. "It worked," Thomas whispered, a smile touching his lips as he raised a trembling hand to Lord Dracon's cheek. "Your eyes. They're blue again, like the sky." Lord Dracon felt something wet on his face, tears, an impossibility for the creature he had been only minutes before. "Why?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "Why sacrifice yourself for me?" "The prophecy," Thomas murmured, his breathing growing labored. "You didn't let me finish telling you. When the last Blackwood returns what was taken, darkness shall yield to light, death to life, and souls long separated shall find each other once more." Understanding dawned like the sunrise Lord Dracon had not seen in centuries. "Katerina," he breathed, "you're connected to her." Thomas nodded weakly. "Her sister survived the plague. Married a Blackwood. I am her descendant, carrying a fragment of her soul through time. That's why I felt drawn to you, why I had to find you. Not just duty, destiny." Lord Dracon pressed his forehead to Thomas's, feeling the life ebbing from the man who had given him back his humanity. "Don't leave me," he pleaded, as mortal emotion overwhelmed him in waves he had forgotten how to navigate. "Not when I've only just found you." "We'll find each other again," Thomas promised, his voice fading. "That's what souls do, when they're meant to be together." His hand fell away from Lord Draken's face, and with a final, shuddering breath, Thomas Blackwood completed his family's centuries-old obligation. For a moment, Lord Draken remained motionless, cradling the body of the man who had redeemed him. Then, with gentle reverence, he closed Thomas's eyes and placed a kiss upon his forehead. "Until we meet again," he whispered. Dawn was approaching as Lord Alaric Drakon, mortal once more, emerged from the castle that had been his prison and sanctuary for 6 centuries. He carried Thomas's body in arms that ached with human weakness but refused to yield their precious burden. The eastern sky was lightening, the stars giving way to the first tentative brushstrokes of sunrise. On a hill overlooking the valley, he buried Thomas Blackwood as the sun crested the mountains, its warmth touching his face for the first time in centuries. The sensation, so simple, so miraculous, brought fresh tears to eyes that could now gaze directly into the light. When the grave was completed, marked with stones and Thomas's hunter's blade, Alaric knelt beside it one final time. "You gave me back my life," he said softly. "I swear it will not be wasted." Rising, he turned his face fully to the sun, feeling its warmth penetrate to bones that had known only darkness for longer than most nations had existed. The world before him was vast with possibilities, countries to explore, people to meet, experiences to cherish with the precious appreciation of one who knows that time is finite. And somewhere in that world, a soul waited to be reunited with his own. Castel Drakon stood behind him, its ancient stones gleaming in the morning light. He would not return to its shadows. The fortress would remain as a monument to what had been, while Alaric Valerian Drakon stepped forward into what could be. With one last look at Thomas's grave, he began walking toward the village below, toward humanity, toward a future both limited and limitless in its mortal splendor. In his pocket, he carried the empty vial that had held Katarina's blood, a reminder of what had been lost and found, sacrificed and gained. The sun climbed higher, and for the first time in 604 years, Alaric smiled without reservation at the simple miracle of another day beginning.